Erev Tov, good evening. We are together in the Rambam's introduction to the Mishneh Torah. Last time we were together, we discussed the Nevuah, the prophecy of Tzefaniah. She mentioned there was of Yirmiyahu. So we mentioned that Tzefaniah taught Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu now teaches or passes on the oral law to the next generation. Who is the next generation? Look together with me on page Lamed Chet 38 of the Rambam's Mishneh Torah here. Uvaruch, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. There's a little Chaf Aleph over there. Right afterwards. Baruch Ben Neriyah, Baruch the son of Neriyah, Kibel Yirmiyahu vedino. He receives the oral law from Yirmiyahu and his Bet Adin. So you have here Tzefaniah, Yirmiyahu, and now you have a figure, Baruch Ben Neriyah. Baruch Ben Neriyah. Who knows who Baruch Ben Neriyah was? Anything you know about Baruch Ben Neriyah? And I would love to see your faces. If your cameras are on, I would love to see you. Thank you to those who have them on and those who don't. Thank you for doing it now. Anyone know who Baruch Ben Neriyah is? Baruch Ben Neriyah, obviously.
That's the first name.
Oh, you like the first name. Very good. Baruch Ben Neriyah is a student of Yirmiyahu. One moment. Baruch Ben Neriyah is a student of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. But it's a very important transition of leadership that happens here in the oral transmission of the Torah. And I want to take a few minutes and just focus on Baruch Ben Neriyah. Who is he? When was he? Where was he? And a few ideas from his life story that will help us understand more about what we can learn from the story of Baruch Ben Neriyah. So the question is, where do we start? Baruch Ben Neriyah is a very famous figure. We see that his father's name is mentioned. It tells us that his father was someone of importance. In fact, his whole family seems to be very important people. Throughout Jewish literature, he's referred to as a sofer, a scribe, perhaps a royal scribe involved with the royal government. He's in a high power position. He later on in his life becomes the personal sofer, the personal scribe of Yirmiyahu. That leads some scholars to suggest that he in fact left his full-time career as being a political scribe, and if that's the right word, a royal scribe, and becoming completely committed to his rabbi and teacher Yirmiyahu, which reminds me in my mind a little bit of Yehoshua alav shalom and Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. Baruch Ben Neriyah is interesting for those who are interested in archaeology, for example. So my father always shares a story that when he was finished yeshiva, he went to university, decided to take a course. I had to take extra courses in the Technion, so one of the courses that was offered was Bible. Having gone to yeshiva, not yeshiva of today. Today in the yeshivot, nobody studies Torah. But then they studied some Tanakh, and said, I'll take the class. Didn't realize that Bible in university means how the Bible is not true and everything in it is just a fairy tale. So the professor would teach things like, we've dug all over Israel, we've never found a remembrance of King David. We've dug all over Israel, there's no wording at all, nothing mentions Shlomo HaMelech. These are all fabrications of a Jewish people, tribes in the desert, so on and so forth. And the professor would argue with my father. My father said, listen, you just didn't dig hard enough. The fact that you didn't find doesn't mean it wasn't there, it just means you didn't dig hard enough. And the truth is that when he came over to America, and I'm not making a pitch for a Christian newspaper, magazine, but there's a periodical called the Biblical Archaeology Review. I actually just saw it in the news this week because they came up with something else. But they, many years afterwards, he's already here in San Diego, put out, we found signs, we found coins that mention on them David HaMelech, King David. And unfortunately, this is something that we see quite often. We see that there are those who dig in order to prove HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah correct, and those who dig in order to prove that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah is incorrect. And this is something that, unfortunately, normally goes down the line of the Israeli archaeologists are digging to prove that everything in the Tanakh is a fabrication, and the Christian archaeologists are busy digging to try to show that everything written inside of the Tanakh is true and is the word of God. Halavai that it was the other way around, or that both of them would be digging for the same reason. Nonetheless, Baruch Ben Neriyah is one of the few biblical figures whose actual name we have in full, perhaps the only one in this context, in full on a seal. We have found a seal on something, in Hebrew it's called a tin, some kind of stone, I don't know exactly tell you what it is, but we found a seal, an emblem, a royal emblem of the signature of Baruch Ben Neriyah. And that is a tremendous discovery for those who are interested in placing him in which part of Jewish history he was in. Was he real? Did he exist? Baruch Ben Neriyah most definitely did exist. We always knew that, but today, Baruch Hashem, we have archaeological evidence to prove that as well. When it comes to who Baruch Ben Neriyah was, in this point in Jewish history, the Jewish kingdom falls. It's really the beginning of Galut. It's the beginning of our exile. Baruch Ben Neriyah is living in a period in which the Jewish people had rejected the prophecies of Yirmiyahu, rejected him, and because of that, merited, or maybe didn't merit, to enter into exile. Baruch Ben Neriyah is one of those leaders, along with Yirmiyahu, who goes into exile with the Jewish people and leads them there. What's crucial to understand about that story is that if Baruch Ben Neriyah is in exile, and his rabbi is in exile, and the Jewish people are no longer in Eretz Israel and they've rejected the prophecies of Yirmiyahu, there's really not much reason for Baruch Ben Neriyah to receive prophecy in the first place. And if you look here, the footnote at the end of this piece, Rav Kapach writes, Chav Bet. So Chav Bet just makes a note to the Mechilta. The Mechilta, the beginning of Parashat Bo. Now, I did not copy over today the language of the Mechilta in its entirety. But the general gist of what happens there in the Mechilta is that Baruch Ben Neriyah complains, so to speak, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't understand. Every one of the Nevi'im had students. What are the name of the Nevi'im students? What are they called? Remember we spoke about them? The students of the Nevi'im, they're called? What? Bnei HaNevi'im. The students really refer to the children of the Nevi'im. Bnei HaNevi'im are those who are being prepared to accept the mantle of prophecy. And that's exactly what Yirmiyahu has been preparing Baruch Ben Neriyah for his entire life. And Baruch Ben Neriyah does not merit to receive prophecy. And he's devastated. It's a very difficult thing for him to comprehend. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why don't you give me prophecy? Why don't you allow me to communicate with you the way Yirmiyahu communicated with you? Why am I worse than any of the other students of the Nevi'im? This Mechilta here is referring to this piece of the puzzle in which Nevu'ah seems to seize here. And Baruch Ben Neriyah goes on to continue leading the Jewish people, but by not meriting their prophecy. If we can suggest, what's the purpose for a Nevu'ah for Baruch Ben Neriyah? What does he need a Nevu'ah? The Jewish people are in exile, they've rejected Yirmiyahu. There's no purpose for them to have a Nevu'ah. Personal Nevu'ot, maybe. But public Nevu'ot, Nevu'ot that are relevant to the whole people, Nevu'ot for the Jewish government, there is none left. And it's in this context of the Jewish kingdom falling apart, Jewish people going to exile, Baruch Ben Neriyah not receiving prophecy, that the life of Baruch Ben Neriyah begins to become very important to us. Let's read together. If you have a Tanakh in front of you, Baruch Ben Neriyah, if he does not have his own book of the Tanakh, so he's going to be mentioned in the book of Yirmiyahu. So if you look in the book of Yirmiyahu, if you have an art scroll, it's on page 1166, but you don't need an art scroll. Look in Yirmiyahu 39, Lamitet. A chain of events is put into effect after the fall of Yerushalayim. Vaya kasher nilkeda Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is captured, it's fallen. All kinds of things begin to happen. Tzidkiyahu alav shalom is blinded by Nebuchadnezzar. He's led away to exile in chains. What happens next? Look in Perek Mem, chapter 40, page 1168. Here, הדבר אשר היה ירמיהו מת אדוני, אחר שלח אותו נבוזרדן, רב טבחים, מן הרמה בקחתו אותו, והוא אסור באזיקים בתוך כל גלות ירושלים ויהודה המוגלים בבלה. We read these pesukim on Tisha B'Av. They're hard pesukim to read. Yirmiyahu is there, chained, on his way to exile. And he knows that he must pass on the baton of leadership to somebody. Who does he pass on the baton of leadership to? Let's look together. Pasuk Hey. ועודנו לא ישוב, ושוב על גדליה בן אחיקם בן שפן, אשר הפקיד מלך בבל בערי יהודה. He turns to Gedalia, the son of Achikam, who has been given the legal right to self-govern. It's some autonomous form of government under occupation, foreign occupation of Israel. Gedalya Ben Achikam becomes the governor over the cities of Judea. ויבוא ירמיהו גדליה בן אחיקם, ירמיהו comes to Gedalia, the son of Achikam, המצפתה וישב איתו בתוך העם, and he sits with him amongst the people הנשארים בארץ who are left over in Eretz Israel. וישמעו כל שרי החיילים אשר בשדה המה ואנשיהם, כי הפקיד מלך בבל את גדליהו בן אחיקם בארץ. And everyone hears the news that Gedalia Ben Achikam has been appointed the Jewish governor over Judea. And the Jews who are there. You have here autonomous Jewish government in Israel under foreign occupation. We have a fast day. The fast day that's named after Gedalia. When is that fast day?
After Rosh Hashanah.
When after Rosh Hashanah?
The day.
Mamash, the day after Rosh Hashanah, correct? It's Tzom Gedalia. I cannot tell you how many times in my career as a rabbi, people have asked, why do we fast on Tzom Gedalia? What happened? What happened on Tzom Gedalia? What happened is what has not stopped happening since. The fact that we can even ask the question, what happened on the fast of Gedalia, means that we're so disconnected with the story of Gedalia that is bound to happen to us again. When you forget history, it repeats itself. Gedalia Ben Achikam is the turning point, not a positive turning point, for what's going to happen to the Jewish people entering exile. There's a few personalities that are introduced here. Yishmael ben Netanyahu, V'Yochanan, V'Yonatan, the children of Kareach. I didn't have a chance to look, and I don't recall by heart if it's a Kamatz Katan or not. Usraya ben Tanchumet. These personalities are here. Vayshava lahem Gedalia ben Achikam, Gedalia ben Achikam promised them, reassures them not to be afraid. Let's keep reading. Let's look on page 1170, Pasuk Yud Bet, 12. וישובו כל היהודים מכל המקומות אשר נדחו שם. The Jews begin to return from the corners in which they'd been hiding. אשר נדחו שם ויבואו ארץ יהודה על גדליהו המצפתה. They come to Gedaliah and Mitzpah. They come to him. ויאספו יין וקיץ הרבה מאוד. And they collect all kinds of wine, dried fruits, things to eat. And here comes a warning. ויוחנן בן קרח וכל שרי החיילים אשר בשדה באו אל גדליהו המצפתה. Yochanan comes, and all the officers of the army, they come to Gedaliah. ויאמרו אליו, and they tell him, הידוע תדע כי בעליס מלך בני עמון. You should know that Baalis, who is Baalis? He's the king of Ammon, a sworn enemy of the Jewish people. שלח את ישמעאל בן נתניה להכותך נפש. Has sent Yishmael, the son of Netanyah, to assassinate you. ולא האמין להם גדליהו בן אחיקם, and Gedalya Ben Achikam refused to accept this rumor that Yishmael was coming to kill him. ויוחנן בן קרח אמר אל גדליהו בסתר במצפה לאמור אל חנה והכה את ישמעאל בן נתניה ואיש לא ידע. He said, I have the ability to go and kill him quietly. Nobody will know. Let me go kill him first. למה יקקה נפש ונפוצו כל יהודה נקבצים אליך ועבדה שארית יהודה? Why are you going to allow yourself to be in a vulnerable place where he will assassinate you? And then this remnant of Israel that is here, the few that are left behind, they'll also have to disperse into exile. ויאמר גדליהו בן אחיקם, and Gedalya Ben Achikam tells the Yochanan ben Kareach, אל תעשה את הדבר הזה, do not do this thing. כי שקר אתה דובר אל ישמעאל. You are speaking falsely against the good man, Yishmael. Here there's a warning. A warning that your life is in danger, but not just your life, Gedalya Ben Achikam. Who else is in danger? The rest of the Jewish people. There are only remnants left. Sherita Pleta, these are the survivors of the Galut. Now, if they assassinate you, we'll be left without a leader, we'll all be forced into exile. Let me go kill him first. Gedalya Ben Achikam says, no, it's not true. You're lying about Yishmael. He would never do such a thing. Vahi Perek Mem Aleph, so Yirmiyahu chapter 41. Vahi B'chodesh HaShavi'i, it was on the 7th month. Which month is the 7th month? Tishrei. Very good. Tishrei. Very good. Tishrei is the 7th month. Very good. Vahi b'chodesh HaShavi'i, on the 7th month. Yishmael ben Netanyah ben Elishama mizera hamelucha. Yishmael, the son of Netanyah, the son of Elishama, he's from the royal family. ורבי המלך ועשרה אנשים איתו. He came to him with the officers of the king with 10 men. El Gedalya Ben Achikam HaMitzpata, they came to Gedalya Ben Achikam. ויאכלו שם לחם יחדיו במצפה. And they come to break bread with him. Most likely to eat Rosh Hashanah meals with him. He hosts them. Come celebrate the holiday of Rosh Hashanah with me. And they do. Yishmael and these 10 men in the middle of the meal of Rosh Hashanah. Maybe not Rosh Hashanah, maybe it's after Rosh Hashanah. A day after, the fast is the day after. So somewhere in the first few days of Tishrei. ויקום ישמעאל בן נתניה ועשרת האנשים אשר היו איתו. Yishmael, the son of Netanyah, and the 10 people who are with him, they rise up, ויכו את גדליהו בן אחיקם בן שפן בחרב וימת אותו. And they strike Gedalia with a sword and they assassinate him. Asher hifkid melech Bavel ba'aretz. This is our man who the king had allowed to maintain Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel. Can you think perhaps of a motive that Yishmael would have, a Jewish man, from the royal family? What motive does he have to conspire with the king of Ammon to come and assassinate the Jewish leader of the remnants of the exile of Am Yisrael? What's the motive? Every crime has to have a motive.
To have the job for himself.
Why does he deserve the job? Why not Gedalia?
His royalty, as you said.
Oh, very good. That's the answer. That's the answer. The answer is, I'm royalty. I should be the ruler. You have to understand how pathetic and absurd this is. You're talking about galut. You're talking about exile. We are falling apart. Our king has been destroyed. Our government has fallen to pieces. Am Yisrael is in exile, in chains. Our prophet is gone. And you're fighting over what? A little hilltop? What do you have? How many Jews are left? What kind of royal office is this? The king appointed him? This is grabbing at it's a lifeboat that we have. It's a raft in the ocean, in the sea. You want to sink the lifeboat because of some pride? Because of your own ego, your own arrogance, you're going to destroy Am Yisrael. To who? To help who? The king of Ammon. This theme of infighting in the Jewish community, for what? For what are you fighting? To accomplish what exactly? To get what? We have a kingdom to fight over. We have a melucha to fight over. We have riches and masses to fight over. We're an am mefozar umforad. We're scattered, dispersed people. We're barely holding on for dear life to the lifeboat that is the Jewish people. They want to drown the rest of us because you're fighting over which seat you have in the lifeboat? Can you imagine? Of course you can imagine. This is the story of the Jewish people today. The story of the Jewish people yesterday. The story of the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years. And there are things in modern Jewish history that we don't discuss. And you know that I don't discuss politics ever from this place. When it comes to politics, let me tell you, my only stance is that all politicians are bad. That's the only thing I can tell you. I don't know righteous politicians, no tzaddikim in politics. And so if you think, well, it's bad, I like this Rasha more than that Rasha, only a Rasha can like Rashaim. You can't like Rashaim. Rashaim are not. You have to hate evil. At the end of the day, though, there are people who make decisions for the whole world. So you have to get involved a little bit, but don't be so proud of your Rasha. Look at my Rasha, he's so great. Look at my Rasha, she's so wonderful. It's a Rasha. In the early years of the state of Israel, there were fighters who were trying to fight for the independence of the land of Israel, of the Jewish people, from the occupation of the British over Eretz Israel. And they resorted to many different tactics. The year I don't have in my mind right now, not so long, right before the founding of the State of Israel. I mean the date. And there's a ship that is headed towards the shores of Israel. That ship is carrying weapons. Weapons to help the Jews who are in Israel save themselves from the Arabs who are trying to massacre them every day. The Jewish people are choked. They don't have weapons. They don't have enough supplies. The man sailing this ship into Israel is none other than Menachem Begin, alav shalom. Menachem Begin is the head of an organization. Anyone know the name of that organization? Etzel, very good. Otherwise known as? They call him the Irgun. That's a nickname. You have on the other side of the Jewish spectrum, David Ben Gurion, Yitzhak Rabin, Alayhim Shalom also. You have them. Which organization do they represent? They're fighters for which unit? What's the group called? The Haganah. We call them the Haganah. That's we're going to say Irgun and Haganah. We could say that? You accept if I use those two terms? Mm-hmm. Yes. So you have here David Ben Gurion, Yitzhak Rabin, that are standing on a beach. They have intel that this ship is coming into Israel. The official cover story, they're afraid of this terrorist organization led by Menachem Begin. They're afraid of them bringing weapons into Israel. It's a boat full of Holocaust survivors and weapons. That's what this boat was. And they make an executive decision. What do you do with your fellow brothers and sisters that just fled Hitler, Yamach Shemov Zichron, that are bringing weapons to help the cause of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael? What do? You sink them in the ocean. David Ben Gurion, Yitzhak Rabin, and a few other names that I'd rather not mention, they give orders to their men to fire at the Altalena. That's the name of the ship. The story of what happens there is something you should read on your own. Personal accounts. When I was in yeshiva, I had a roommate whose grandmother, she passed away when I was in yeshiva with him, whose grandmother had received a special medal from Menachem Begin when he was prime minister, because she had saved his life on the Altalena. She saw that something was coming towards Menachem Begin, and she jumped on him and pushed him into the ocean, into the Mediterranean Sea. She saved his life, and he gave her thanks later in life when he became prime minister. You have to imagine this story. The world is watching. Am Yisrael is fighting not for independence, political independence. Am Yisrael is fighting because the Holocaust has just burned down Europe. We have nowhere to go except for Eretz Yisrael. And there's a few of us there. A few against millions of enemy forces. And who do we fire on? Who do we shoot at? Not at our enemies, chas v'shalom. Why would we fight them? The Haganah was all about self-control, about restraint, about not fighting back, only defense. So instead, we fight our own brothers and sisters and Holocaust survivors that Hitler didn't manage to kill. We managed to shoot in the middle of an ocean, right off the shores of Eretz Yisrael. If you wish to understand anything about Israeli politics, anything, I'm not talking here about politics like what you think politics, to understand what's the divide in Israel, what happened, on which history is this country based, this is where you have to go. You must start here. The world is fighting us. And instead of joining together and fighting the world back to protect each other collectively, Am Yisrael consistently chooses to fight each other instead. And our enemies who are around us, they look at us and they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. How could it be that instead of us having to kill Am Yisrael, they're doing the work for us? Instead of us destroying the Jewish people leave them together long enough, they'll destroy each other. That's how Am Yisrael works. Recently now in Israel, there was a Talmid Chacham, not from his camp, but a Talmid Chacham nonetheless, who met with other Jewish leaders who belonged to the wrong denominations for the rabbinic establishment. And today they're crucifying him. I'm using that word intentionally. For the audacity to meet evil Jewish people. How much do we have to fight before we ever get to the idea that we're not going to agree with each other? We belong at the same table. We should at least fight with each other face to face. We should at least agree on a venue, on a place, on a time, a location with which to debate Jewish ideas, things that are relevant to the whole community. Am Yisrael, though, seems to choose always to do something else. That's exactly what happens here. Gedalya Ben Achikam is assassinated, not by enemy forces, by enemies among the Jewish people. Can you imagine the day after Rosh Hashanah, the highest day of the Jewish calendar, maybe aside from Yom Kippurim? You come out of Rosh Hashanah straight, the next morning, straight into Tzom Gedalia. What do you think HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to tell us? You just did teshuvah. We're all so wonderful. We love each other. It's so great. You want to do teshuvah for something? You have 10 days of teshuvah. Do teshuvah for this. This is a national chet, a national iniquity, a sin, an evil that Am Yisrael is still guilty of today. And so the story continues.
Question.
Yes.
I'm confused in that the name Yishmael was always associated with Islam, and yet he was a prince of Yehudah.
So here we don't yet have Islam in this time of our history, but you find that throughout the Talmud, Rabbi Yishmael, there are rabbis named Yishmael. At which point does Yishmael go from being a name that Jewish people won't give their children? So maybe that's the way to look at it. It could be that when we entered into the exile of Yishmael, we no longer wanted to use that name. I mean, I have never seen anywhere why you should not name a child Yishmael. In fact, I love the name Yishmael.
The name of the man of God, the man of Hashem.
Correct.
But
though
I was just thinking, in terms of historical use of the name, I was very surprised to see that.
It's very curious.
Again, the more you study Judaism, the more you find out. It's just amazing.
Very curious though, who is this Yishmael again? And I'm not saying comparison in a hard comparison, a soft comparison. It's another brother, a family member, who's here to try to destroy us. But at the end of the day, we're related to Yishmael. Yishmael is the son of Avraham Avinu. Why does Yitzchak have to worry? Yishmael, for what? For what purpose? What's the problem with Yishmael? You're brothers. But here, maybe Yishmael has a not so positive connotation here. Maybe something about that Yishmael, the rivalry that exists, that is dangerous for Am Yisrael. So what happens now at the end of the chapter? ויקח יוחנן בן קרח וכל שרי החיילים אשר איתו את כל שריט העם אשר השיב את ישמעאל בן נתניה מן המצפה אחר הכת גדליה בן אחיקם גברים אנשי המלחמה ונשים וטף וסריסים אשר השיב מגבעון וילכו וישבו בגבעון. Okay, this is sorry, I skipped for you a whole section. Ultimately what happens is yeah, well, hold on, I'm sorry. There's a plot here. I'm sorry, Mechila, before I get to this. In the middle of Mem Aleph, in chapter 41, you're going to see they end up killing more Jewish people. They entrap them and then they kill them. This is a terrible part of the story, which I didn't want to get into. What happens in Yud? ויש בישמעאל את כל שארית העם אשר במצפה. Yishmael captures all of the rest of the Jewish people who are in Mitzpah. את בנות המלך ואת כל העם הנשארים במצפה אשר הפקיד נבוזרדן רב טבחים את גדליהו בן אחיקם. וישבם ישמעאל בן נתניה וילך לעבור את בני עמון. So he kidnaps all of these Jews. וישמע יוחנן בן קרח וכל שרי החיילים אשר איתו את כל הרעה אשר עשה ישמעאל בן נתניה. He hears. Yochanan hears what's happening with Yishmael, all this evil that he's done. ויקחו את כל האנשים וילכו, they go all together. להילחם עם ישמעאל, to go to war against Yishmael. וימצאו אותו אל מים רבים אשר בגבעון, and they find him by this great pool of water in גבעון. ויהי כראות כל העם אשר את ישמעאל את יוחנן בן קרח ואת כל שרי החיילים אשר איתו וישמחו. The captives see that someone has come to rescue them and they rejoice. ויסובו כל העם אשר שבה ישמעאל מן המצפה וישובו וילכו ליוחנן בן קרח. And all these people turned back and they went over to יוחנן. וישמעאל בן נתניה נמלט בשמונה אנשים מפני יוחנן וילך אל בני עמון. And Yishmael escapes from Yochanan and is absorbed into the people of Ammon. Interestingly enough, if I'm not mistaken, this seems to be, and it could be that I am mistaken, but it could be this is the last we hear of him. He goes to Ammon. That's where he disappears to. Ultimately, this group of people are now terrified. Why are they terrified? Who are they afraid of? Who was just assassinated? Gedalia, the governor that who had appointed? Very good, Nebuchadnezzar. They're terrified that what happens when they find out that the Jewish people assassinated his appointee. They're afraid he's going to come kill them. These are the survivors of that assassination. And so they run away to Egypt. And ultimately what happens is that it's the assassination of Gedalya Ben Achikam which leads to the real downfall of Am Yisrael. We could have remained autonomous for a long time, but we didn't. Once again, like with the Biryonim in the Second Temple, we had enough storehouses for years to stay within the walls of Yerushalayim and be besieged, but we decided instead to go to civil war. We lost those resources. We fall hands to the Romans. This happens over and over and over and over, Am Yisrael. Self-sabotage ultimately plays into the hands of our enemies. Can you imagine if Am Yisrael had never left? And if we had retained a kingdom of Jewish people in Israel? Yes, albeit under occupation. Yes, true, not truly free. But in Yehuda, in Judah, we would have never left. That galut was self-imposed. The destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, maybe not so much. But that galut was self-imposed. When Yochanan flees, it seems like Baruch Ben Neriyah goes with him. Ultimately following Yirmiyahu into the Golan. There is a little piece here. If you turn to page 40, it's a chapter 45. 45. That's 1178 in the art scroll. Hadavar asher diber Yirmiyahu hanavi el Baruch Ben Neriyah. These are the words that Yirmiyahu the prophet spoke to Baruch Ben Neriyah. B'chadvot advarim ha'ele al sefer mipi Yirmiyahu. When he was writing down, he was, there's a word for this. He was a scribe. He was writing down everything Yirmiyahu was dictating to him. B'shana ha'revi'it, in the 4th year, lehoyakim ben Yoshiyahu melech Yehuda le'emor, he tells him, Ko amar Adonai Elohei Yisrael alecha Baruch. Hashem is speaking to you, Baruch, through Yirmiyahu. Amarta oy nali ki asaf Adonai yagon al machovi. You say, woe to me that Hashem has added pain to my existing pain. Yagati b'anchati umnucha lo matzati. I'm suffering and I have not found rest. Kotomar elav, and you should tell him, Yirmiyahu, Ko amar Adonai hine asher baniti ani hores. Say to Baruch, that which I have built I am now destroying. Vet asher nata'ati ani notesh, and that which I planted I am uprooting. Vet kol haaretz hi. And I'm going to do this throughout the whole land. Ve'ata tevakesh lecha gedolot al tevakesh. Don't ask for great things for yourself. Perhaps this is a reference to the prophecy that Baruch Ben Neriyah so much wants. Don't ask for this. Ki hineni mevi ra'al kol basar neum Adonai. I am now bringing evil, misfortune to every living creature. V'natati dechat nafshecha leshalal. And the booty, the reward that you'll have is the fact that I will let you live. Al kol hamekomot asher telech sham. Wherever you go, you will be safe. That's your privilege. You're asking for too much if you want more than that. But you I will allow to survive. Our Chachamim see it as such a great tragedy that Baruch Ben Neriyah was fitting. He was ready to be the next prophet of Am Yisrael. He should have continued being our leader as Yirmiyahu was. But we destroyed that. We destroyed that with the infighting, with Gedalya Ben Achikam's assassination. This leads to a theological conversation, which I'll get to in just a moment. But with your permission, I just want to tell you a few things that our Chachamim write about Baruch Ben Neriyah. A rabbi struggle with why Ezra didn't leave exile in the times of who led the Jewish people back in the generation of Islam. Who was that? His name?
Tesco?
Was no, a non-Jewish king. Who led Am Yisrael back?
The Persian king.
Koresh, very good. Koresh. He lets the Jewish people go back. So why didn't he go back? Why did Ezra wait so long to go back? Say our Chachamim in Masechet Megillah, Kol Zaman sheBaruch Ben Neriyah Kayam, so long as Baruch Ben Neriyah was alive, Lo hinicho Ezra ve'ala. Ezra, who's the next person we'll talk about, Ezra, the student of Baruch Ben Neriyah, refused to leave his rabbi. So long as Baruch Ben Neriyah was alive, he chose to remain in exile and study from his rabbi than to go back to Eretz Yisrael. So, it's an interesting question. Why did Baruch Ben Neriyah not go back? Baruch Ben Neriyah, why don't you go back to Israel? You're the leader. Why does Ezra have to wait for him to die in order for him to go back? Why does Baruch Ben Neriyah not go back to Eretz Yisrael? This answer is in Shir HaShirim Rabbah. The Midrash on Shir HaShirim offers the following story. Lama lo ala be'ota sha'a? Why did Baruch Ben Neriyah not return to Eretz Yisrael when Koresh allowed the Jews to go back? Baruch Ben Neriyah Adam Gadol v'Yashish haya. Baruch Ben Neriyah was a great man, but he was also very old. V'afilu ba'alonka lo haya yachol litain. And even if they would take him today they use that word as a stretcher, but even if they would transport him, it would be dangerous for him. He was unable to be brought to Eretz Yisrael. He simply wasn't in the physical state of being in which he was able to return to Eretz Yisrael. And because of that, he remains in exile. There's some other teachings of our Chachamim. Our rabbis in Masechet Megillah on page Yudalad Amud Bet, so 14b, they mentioned that there were 8 Nevi'im who were also Kohanim, who were descendants of Rachav. Who was Rachav? We mentioned her when we discussed Yehoshua, you remember? Who was Rachav? She was Yehoshua's wife. Previously she was an innkeeper. You remember that word? An innkeeper. Art Scroll is really good with that. She was a prostitute, and she marries Yehoshua after saving the spies who come to Eretz Yisrael. She merited to righteous descendants. Neriyah and Baruch are both the descendants of Rachav Hazonah, that even though they came, these are the people that she merited to have as her righteous descendants. Let's address one more point. And the truth is that if you have a Moreh Nevuchim on your own, you should probably do this whole chapter. I can't, in this context, do the whole Moreh Nevuchim with you, this whole chapter. In the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, people ask me why I use such an old one. I use an old one because I won't give up Harav Kapach for a nicer print. I prefer a real translation than a nicer print of a different person. In section 2 of the Moreh Nevuchim, in chapter 32, the Rambam begins to discuss here prophecy. Who can merit to receive prophecy? He mentions 3 different categories, 3 different approaches to prophecy. Hashkafa harishona hi hashkafat hamon ha'amim hakadmonim me'otam ha'ma'aminim b'nevuah. There's a first camp of people, early people who believed in prophecy. V'gam miktzat hamonei anshe toratenu sovrim ken. Even some of the masses of the Jewish people believe such a thing. Meaning not Chachamim, but Jewish masses believe prophecy works like this.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, what chapter are you reading again?
It's section 2 of the Moreh Nevuchim, chapter 32. And I'm reading about one paragraph in. I don't know how it's broken down by you. So we have some co-religionists who also believe that this is how prophecy works. And I think that most Orthodox Jews, if I had to use that word, they believe that prophecy works like this, and I'll prove my point in just a moment. That Hashem chooses whoever He wants from among the people and makes him a prophet and prophesies to him and sends him out. It doesn't make a difference if this person is chacham or he's a fool. Gadol bashanim or tzair bashanim, whether he's old or he's young. Ela shehem matnim bo Gam haginut mesuyemet v'kosher midot. They have some minimal requirements. He has to be a nice person. He has to have some common good character traits. לפי שבני אדם לא הגיעו עד כדי כך לומר כי השם מנבא אדם רע. Because even they don't believe that Hashem would prophesy an evil person. אלא שיעשהו הגון תחילה כפי השקפה זו. According to this approach, many old nations, as well as many of our uneducated Jewish brethren, they believe that when it comes to prophecy, anybody can be a prophet. Prophecy is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu choosing you to be a prophet. Am I correct that most Jews believe this? What do you think? Is that a heavy accusation against the Orthodox Jewish community?
Yes.
It is a heavy accusation. Raphael, you're right. It is a heavy accusation. So prove me right. Later, when you have time, go into Google. Go into Google and look up the Baba who goes around Israel right now, telling everybody that he's the Mashiach, that the end is near, that evil things are coming to the Jewish people. He is considered a huge personality in the Jewish scene. I cannot tell you how many rabbis and chief rabbis think that he is the chosen one of Hashem. He's alive right now. He used to be a tractor driver in Gush Katif. He was a farmer, drove a tractor, with the big wheels on the farm. Old MacDonald, that's who he was. And didn't study Torah, didn't know anything. One day, overnight, I think the age in the 30s, somewhere in his 30s, HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to him. The man, I'm not exaggerating right now, the man literally stands in front of cameras. And he speaks in front of audiences like this. He downloads messages from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, downloads them, and he shares them with everybody. And if you think he's not a common person, you can ask me afterwards for his name. You'll put it in Google, and you'll tell me almost every Jewish organization you know, website that you know, they have him in their articles, they quote him, they mention him. He's a tractor driver who now is a prophet of the Jewish people. How can a tractor driver become this great rabbi when he never even went to yeshiva? How could it be? I'll tell you how. Because like this, they believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can choose anybody. Anybody can have HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveal himself to them and then they become a tzaddik. No, what does a tzaddik have to do with being a chacham? You're just a tzaddik. Or how about the guy in Eilat? He was a bouncer in a nightclub in Eilat. Today he runs around Israel with a black hat and a big shofar. He blows shofar to heal people and save people. The guy calls himself Rabbi so-and-so, interviewed in the news as Rabbi so-and-so, obviously nowhere near as the following of the first guy I mentioned to you. But he is honest. I never went to yeshiva. How did I become a rabbi? HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to me outside of that nightclub. I was a bouncer, now I'm a Baba. That's what happened to me. It's a good book. You should write a book, From Bouncer to Baba. That would be a nice book. Am Yisrael believes this. The bouncer. Am Yisrael believes these things. Yesterday he was an Amaretz, today he's a tzaddik. You have some person come through here selling amulets, telling you they can energy heal you, they can read. Let me sit down with them for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Let us study a piece of Shulchan Aruch together. Let me have 10 minutes with them. If they can't study Shulchan Aruch, forget the Gemara. I'm not talking about Gemara, Mishnayot. Shulchan Aruch, let me sit with them. Where? Hilchot Netilat Yadayim. I want to sit with them. Hilchot Netilat Yadayim. All of these babas are going to fall apart. Mekubalim. What's a mekubal? What is a mekubal? You know what you're talking when you say mekubalim? You want to talk about mekubalim? The Arizal, Rav Chaim Vital, the Ben Ish Chai, the Chida, Chacham Mordechai Eliyahu, the Peli Yoetz. You're not talking about the baba from the nightclub. You're not talking about the tractor driver who today was chosen to be a prophet of Hashem. But the tens of thousands of Jewish people who believe in these people, you think it's not you? I told you, I'm going to give you a name afterwards when I'm not on camera. You're welcome to look him up. Look how many people quote him. It should scare you. Many people believe in this. The second is that of the philosophers. I'm not going to read to you inside what the Rambam writes. The Rambam says that it's a belief that a person has to perfect themselves in wisdom and intellect until they're able to cling to HaKadosh Baruch Hu or to this divine source of information, at which point they become a prophet. Says the Rambam then, V'ashkafa shlishit, the third type. So the first one is HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses you. The second one, if I could summarize very simply, you choose HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You work hard to become a prophet. The third one is what the Rambam says. Listen how the Rambam writes. V'ashkafa shlishit, the third approach. V'ashkafat toratenu v'yisod shitatenu. It is the hashkafa of our Torah. It's the foundation of our approach. So it's not, the Rambam is not saying it's not my approach, it's the Torah's approach, this one. And it's very similar to the philosophical understanding. Obviously, a stupid person can't be a Navi. But there's one detail that we differ from the philosophers about Nevuah. What is it? That the person who's fitting for Nevuah, he can only... He is not able to prophesy unless what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses him too. So you can perfect yourself all you want. But you being perfect is not enough for you to prophesy. It's enough for you to be worthy of prophecy. But not to actually prophesy. And his example, he mentions another example, but it mentioned Nilmad ze mimaaseh Baruch Ben Neriyah. We can learn this from Baruch Ben Neriyah. Lefi shehu talmid Yirmiyahu. He's a student of Yirmiyahu. V'hichshiro v'lamdo v'chino. And his rabbi prepared him, made sure he was able to be a prophet. V'ayta cheshkat nafsho lihinabeh. And his whole desire of his existence was to become a prophet. V'nimna. But he was denied prophecy. This is the approach of Judaism regarding prophecy. You can perfect yourself. But at the end of the day, it's not enough to come here. Something has to come to you as well. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to choose you as well. And this is where we differ from the first two categories. The book Moreh Nevuchim is so important. It's so important. It doesn't make a difference if you have other inclinations in Torah aside from it. But as a foundational work, at least the parts that are understandable. There are parts of Moreh Nevuchim that you really need a teacher, you really need to sit hard and work, and maybe it's not even so relevant for you. But the foundations of emunah, of de'ot, foundations of our faith that are in the Moreh Nevuchim are so crucial. Why on earth they don't teach Moreh Nevuchim in yeshivot? The real answer is because the yeshivot would cease to exist if we taught Moreh Nevuchim in yeshivot. But the answer, they prefer to study all kinds of other trivial works, mamash trivial things, instead of real books of Chachamim. You don't have to just study Moreh Nevuchim. What about the book of Kuzari, of Rabbi Levi? Sefer HaIkarim, of Rabbi Yosef Albo? What about Chovot HaLevavot, of Rabbi Bachye? The real foundational works of Am Yisrael. Who studies them? Which yeshivot study them? And don't tell me I learned Chovot HaLevavot. I know everyone in yeshiva or in seminary studied only one chapter of Chovot HaLevavot. Only one chapter. Which chapter? Anybody know which chapter everyone studies? Yeah, very good. Only about bitachon, about emunah and bitachon. That's what they study. There's a fantastic introduction, Chovot HaLevavot. You should see it, in which he destroys the Judaism of 2020. The whole introduction of the book destroys. A similar destruction in a different context in halakha. The Ben Ish Chai in his introduction to Rav Pa'alim destroys what we know today to be the Jewish system. Most likely that's why they don't study his books. Harav Peretz for many years used to come and give lectures in different schools in Yerushalayim. One of them was at Bet Yaakov. I think his granddaughter studied there. Sephardic Bet Yaakov. So they would bring him to teach. One time in the shiur he quoted Rabbi Yehuda Levi of the Kuzari. And the principal came over to him and said, Harav Peretz, we appreciate your time very much. We appreciate that you don't charge us for classes, but we ask that you don't come back to our school anymore. How dare you quote Rabbi Yehuda Levi in a Jewish school? Tov, I went over my time when it comes to the Rambam. But if there are messages that we can walk away from, the last one first, We must study classic Jewish texts. Baruch Ben Neriyah is a textbook case of a person who desired to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that desire wasn't necessarily reciprocated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's something that many of us may experience in our life, maybe not in terms of prophecy, but to know that such a thing is real, it's there, it exists, to know how to deal with the pain of that. Baruch Ben Neriyah goes on to lead the Jewish people anyways. He becomes the leader of the Jews in Babel. He teaches Ezra. He makes the next generation of leadership who brings the Jewish people back home. But they say, there's a saying, what's the difference between a smart person and a wise person? Is a smart person will get himself out of problems that the wise person would have never got himself into in the first place. That's the difference between a smart person and a wise person. In Hebrew, a chacham and a pikeach. What does it mean? What does it mean for us? There are so many tricks of how to get out of galut, how to get out of exile, how to be the Ezra, how to bring the Mashiach. This is going to bring Mashiach, that is going to bring Mashiach. Why not, instead of focusing how to bring the Geulah, focus on what caused the galut in the first place? The story of Gedalya Ben Achikam. The story of Yishmael. The story of Yochanan. Betrayal in the Jewish ranks. Disintegration of Jewish leadership. You want to see another example? Go look at the beginning of the Karaite movement, the politics that started that movement. The Rambam's children and grandchildren were the Jewish leaders of Egypt, and all of a sudden somebody else needed a position too. And so what happens? He goes to fight, goes to war. That war ends up a split in Judaism between the rabbinic Jews and the Karaite Jews. Two different governments. Our autonomy of a autonomous Jewish government in Egypt falls to pieces, and the exile that you know about is where we are all today. This happens over and over and over and over. Baruch Ben Neriyah is the next link in our chain. And he teaches us not just about what happens when we cause destruction. But for me, Baruch Ben Neriyah gives hope. Hope that yes, he didn't merit prophecy. Yes, he was exiled from Eretz Israel. Yes, he didn't merit all the things he wished to see. But when life gives you lemons, when Baruch Ben Neriyah is dealt this hand, he does not stop. He continues going forward. And it's only because of this crucial turning point, the link in the chain is so strong, that Baruch Ben Neriyah gives us Ezra HaSofer, who we will discuss tomorrow night. B'ezrat Hashem.